Over the past decade, fracking has become a flashpoint of American politics. It's allowed us to produce billions of units of oil and natural gas, saving American households thousands of dollars. It's helped the US reduce our reliance on rival foreign powers, such as Russia, Iran, China, Saudi Arabia, and worst of all, Canada. But there is no such thing as free lunch. Recent polls indicate that a majority of us prefer not to have industrial chemicals and explosive gas mixed into our drinking water. Data has yet to be collected regarding sentiment towards everyone being burnt to a crisp on an inhospitable death marshmallow, but using billions of units of additional fossil fuel probably isn't a great idea if you are worried about that sort of thing. Today, we'll take a look at the strongest arguments on both sides of the fracking conversation. We can't completely avoid bias in ourselves and in the media we consume, but we can be aware of these biases. So before we dive in, I'll let you know the conclusions I've come to. I'm left-leaning on most issues, I'm concerned about climate change, and I'm generally very pro-fracking. If that sounds like a contradiction to you, then keep watching. Part 1. Local impact. Fracking is, in short, a process of injecting millions of gallons of water mixed with hundreds of chemicals at a high pressure deep underground. The fracking process creates cracks in the sediment that oil or natural gas can seep through so they can be slurped up by the well. This mixture injected underground is referred to in industry as fracking fluid, and out of industry as nasty gunk. After the well is fracked, most of the fluid is removed, but millions of gallons remain in the ground. The new cracks created by fracking allow pockets of dinosaur gunk to reach our new well, but they also sometimes cause explosive gas and nasty gunk to seep into the water supplies of thousands of Americans. Some fracking advocates will throw up their hands and argue along the lines of, the economic benefit enjoyed by hundreds of millions surely outweighs the downsides experienced by a few thousand people. Or, in other words, who cares about a few farmers? This argument is at least unempathetic and probably not philosophically sound. We shouldn't advocate to knowingly infringe on people's rights, no matter how much value it would bring to society. Anyone who dissents here can consider how much value enslaving one individual would need to bring to society in order for it to be a reasonable thing to do or to advocate for. But there is a stronger argument for fracking. A majority of wells are far away from populated areas. For those wells that are close to residents, consent can be earned and mutually agreeable arrangements can be found. Clean water can be tanked in to ensure water access to impacted individuals. Households in local communities gain thousands of dollars in value from improved public services and tax revenues. And landowners who lease land directly can earn tens of thousands of dollars, making the deal well worth it for many of them. Fracking can cause harm in local communities, but it can bring significant benefits as well. Who gets to decide if the localized benefits outweigh the local costs? It should be up to the local communities to manage fracking in their areas. The choice shouldn't be made for them. The ability to decide shouldn't be taken away by fracking bans imposed by well-intentioned urban elites. If you explore the fracking conversation, you will constantly hear about the risks of earthquakes, which sound scary, but the single largest earthquake attributed to fracking in the USA was a 4.0 on the Richter scale. Earthquakes at this magnitude are largely harmless, and we already experience thousands of them per year. So this is not really a serious concern. Part 2. Climate impact. This may come as a surprise to some American viewers, but Europeans have been living with gas prices in the $6, $7, or even $8 range for the past decade. However, in a region where gas has been around twice as expensive, the average household expenditure on motor fuels is around the same or even lower than in American households. Europeans drive smaller, more efficient vehicles, they use public transit at 10 times the rate, and have adapted their society in other ways that dramatically reduce their energy consumption. While part of this difference may be cultural, a significant driver for this behavior is the higher cost of fuels in a region which is unable to produce energy resources at nearly the scale of the United States. Fracking is often touted as a necessary bridge, providing us with a bit more fossil fuel as we work to increase renewable production. But is it really necessary? If the per capita energy use in Europe is half what it is here in the US, can't we also manage with significantly less energy? If we didn't have as much cheap energy from sources like fracking and offshore drilling, energy prices would be higher, and we would be forced, like our friends in Europe, to use less of it. And to a climate advocate, to most people who oppose fracking, to me, this is a good thing. The Europeans aren't grumbling about driving their toy cars around, and having more pressure to make cities more walkable would be another big plus. There is a catch though. However much we did reduce energy usage, we would still need a good deal of it. And where in the world would that energy come from? Part 3. Geopolitics. Today is a unique moment in history. We are over a year and a half into Russia's 2-week special military operation in Ukraine. Tensions are high as China has its eyes ever on Taiwan, and war has again returned to the Middle East as just a few days ago, radical Hamas terrorists slaughtered hundreds of Israeli citizens. These attacks were sponsored and endorsed by Iran. Fracking plays a key role in our ability to economically deter hostile state actors. Russia and Iran are especially dependent on energy economies. In 2012, US sanctions on Iran, primarily targeting their oil, led to their GDP being reduced by more than half over the next decade. The resources we generated via fracking made the reduced supply of oil on global markets much easier to bear, and the sanctions much easier to stomach and to enforce. The EU relies heavily on Russia for natural gas, critical for heating homes during their cold winters. Prior to Russia's attack on Ukraine, 50% of European natural gas was imported from Russia. But sanctions and the disabling and eventual destruction of Russian pipelines dramatically reduced these imports. Costs increased 10 times over during the ensuing energy shortage crisis, and some of the wealthiest households in the world were left wondering if they would be able to heat their homes through the winter months of early 2023. The worst effects of the crisis were narrowly avoided thanks to last-minute policy efforts and a fairly mild winter. The United States and other nations increased imports to Europe, but not enough to cover their needs. So today, the EU still imports billions of units of Russian gas, and this money goes directly to supporting the Russian war effort to destroy Ukraine. If we were producing more energy resources, we would be better positioned to oppose this threat. And if we were producing fewer, who's to say how much more money the EU would need to be sending to Russian oligarchs? So how do we balance these different variables against each other? My perspective is that if fracking was banned entirely in the United States today, we would likely pick up some habits from our European neighbors. We currently release 14% of the world's CO2 emissions, and assuming generously we cut emissions by 30% tomorrow, that we reach fully green energy by 2050, with some very rough napkin math, the total worldwide historic CO2 released into the atmosphere could be reduced by maybe 2%. Global warming is a generation-defining issue. It will arguably cause far more harm to humanity than the modern geopolitical concerns we're dealing with today. But how much more important is it? Is a meager few percentage point reduction in total global emissions worth jeopardizing the geopolitical positioning of the democratic world? I hope I've made a strong case that it might not be, and that even if you disagree, you can come away with a strong understanding of the other perspective. What you just watched was only the first half of a multi-format experience. Let me explain. When you engage in politics, your goal is to pull the world to the best possible version of itself. And everyone who disagrees with you is necessarily trying to pull the world to a worse version of itself. And the great challenge, the great conflict of politics is trying to figure out which side of that rope you're on. The most important thing you can do as a political actor is to challenge your ideas and to throw away the worst of them. The second half of this experience is for you to take that next step, is for you to have those conversations and to challenge your ideas. For anyone interested, I've set up a survey on my subreddit where you can be matched with conversation partners, including myself. Especially while I'm still small, I'll probably also be responding to basically everything that gets posted there, so feel free to do that if you're interested. Finally, thanks for tuning in. If I did change your perspective, feel free to support the channel however you'd like. Thanks again.